Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, Mystery Coach Theater. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks again for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you once again. And today we're talking Red Raider football on the program once again, but we want to dive into, well, some others talking Red Raider football. Athlon Sports kicked out a list within recent days of some anonymous Big 12 coaching critiques. So these are coaches within the Big 12 conference talking about our beloved Red Raiders. And they better be talking nice about them, or we got ways to find out who you are. That may be an empty threat, but either way, just take it as serious. We'll put them up here on the screen for those watching on YouTube, kind of take them one at a time. And I want to get with you on the accuracy of some of these statements, what we feel like may be on point, maybe some are not so much on point. And then as far as some of them kind of assigning a task to Texas Tech this offseason, we'll get to whether or not these boxes have been checked. But first, Chris, let's take a look at the list as it stands. Here we go. Mystery Coach Theater is what I feel like we're getting into here today. But let's start with the one at the top of the list. We've got 5 thoughts to run through. Number 1, quote, they lost a ton of production on defense. It really jumps out at you. And I know you and I spent a lot of time this offseason talking about all those shoes to fill, so I'm sure that's not lost elsewhere across the conference, specifically maybe when thinking about opposing offensive coordinators, right?
Yeah, I think this is the most this is the comment that I clearly agree with the most because, I mean, how could it not? It's kind of a Captain Obvious type statement, but I think if you want to have questions about this team and you're looking at how much production that they lost, you know, I could argue it the other way too a bit. I think that, you know, Joey and Tim would tell you they're maybe deeper. And as we heard, you know, somebody like Marcel Yates say, I think we're a lot more physical at corner, and we needed to be. But I think when you replace guys like Tony and Jalen and the corners that you did and a safety like Rabbit that was just kind of a do-everything guy that, I mean, he won you sealed the TCU game. You know, there was just a lot of people, somebody like Miles Cole, who was a draft pick. You know, yeah, it's hard to just ignore a lot of that and then just assume, yeah, everything's going to be just fine. Everything's going to be good. Now, like, I hate using them as an example, but what I think is interesting is Texas, they lost a ton to graduation and, you know, and everything like that. And on defense, especially up front with those 2 monsters up front, and yet they're still ranked in the top 10 in the country. So it doesn't mean that you're supposed to be taking a step back. You could theoretically be better, but to the comment's point, it does jump out at you, and it should give you pause. I totally agree with that.
Well, and I think to the Texas comparison, particularly when you recruit at a certain level, then obviously you can really take it to mean something different when you're talking about replacing guys that you lost for whatever reason. I'll never forget, it's been several years now, but watching a Longhorn football game once upon a time, and it must have been early on in the year because the commentator was saying something along the lines of, well, Texas has got a big job on their hands. They lost 5 offensive linemen to the NFL draft. And I thought, yeah, and I bet they've got probably 5 more coming up right behind them. So the replacement challenge is not created equally everywhere. But, man, those guys you just ran down right there when we're talking about Tony Bradford, Jalen Hutchings, Rashad and Malik Dunlap as far as DBs, and then Rabbit And I know that Rashad Malik did not begin their careers at Texas Tech. But, Chris, think about the number of snaps that is walking out that door, man. And you just cannot replace experience. You can't replicate it in practice or in fall camps until you're actually there on Saturday with the lights on. Now, those guys are very, very good players, but even if they were just sort of marginal players, I mean, the number of snaps that they have seen, that's going to be a big hill to get over. There's no doubt about that. And, of course, those guys were better, obviously, than marginal. But I'm curious, you referenced it already. When they talk about some of the depth on the defensive side of the football, is that mostly, I guess, pointing to what is replacing guys like Hutchings and Bradford? Are we mostly talking about the defensive front, you think, when they reference that? Or is it maybe a little bit more spread out across some of the back end as well than I'm considering?
Oh, I think it's up front in the secondary, yeah. I mean, I just think that, you look at how many snaps, as you mentioned, Rashad Williams, Malik Dunlap, and Dedrion Taylor Demerson played. And there were others too that graduated, but those are the ones that stick out. And you just look at how many snaps like Tony and Jalen, and not necessarily Miles Cole. And it's not like, I mean, here's the thing: you replace a Miles Cole, but like statistically, it was still, even when he left here, it was still a more of a, man, it's what could have been kind of conversation. And he doesn't play in the bowl game, and you have someone like Amir Washington that sacked the quarterback 3 times, which is almost as many sacks as Miles Cole had in his entire Tech career. Right. And so I think that's like a point counterpoint that needs to be made. So because you touched on the example that I gave, and you mentioned the recruiting, well, you are recruiting at a higher level. And while maybe you wish there was just one more year to kind of grow some of these classes up a bit, you're going to start to see a lot of the work that they've been doing, and albeit young and inexperienced, start to push through. And I think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt because, I mean, Ben Roberts worked out pretty good, didn't he? Well, that's part of their recruiting class. Or classes, I should say. And, really, have you been disappointed at all with any of the young pieces that have kind of pushed through? I mean, we're kind of getting a heads up that Sheridan Wilson may, in fact, have pushed his way to the forefront. That's a part of their recruiting classes. So I guess point being, they are starting to make their presence felt. And just because we don't know their name or there was a lot of production, it doesn't mean that you can't actually improve upon what you did last year, because I would say you kind of do need to improve upon what you did last year, because you didn't take the ball enough away. You didn't create enough turnovers. You didn't get to the quarterback enough. That there was plenty of things to kind of nitpick on. That that was always my argument a year ago. Is like when you looked at the offensive issues and the turnover margin and all that. It's like, well, the defense is not doing their part at all. And they have take 3 over everything you could see. And so maybe with a little more depth, and I'll tell you the biggest thing, here's the word that we need to focus on: speed. I think maybe you're quite a bit faster. And maybe Jacob Rodriguez won't miss most of the season. And maybe Miguel Dingle won't miss the majority of the year. And on and on and on it goes. You get a guy like Isaac Smith back in the fold, who wasn't at all last year. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and we'll get back to some of that talent that's been recruited, bubbling up to the surface coming up in just a moment. I want to flip now to the offensive side of the football for take number 2 from this anonymous coach.
First, today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and it does it all while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within only 24 hours. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
I want to flip now to the offensive side of the football for take number 2 from this anonymous coach, who says this: best case scenario is they cobble together an offensive line from the portal to help out that running back. He's a legit dude. Now, as far as accuracy is concerned, the final portion of that statement is certainly 100% accurate as far as Taj Brooks goes. A legit dude. And I kind of feel like, Chris, I don't know, given the movement that we saw this offseason, that was a thought that the coaching staff obviously had in their mind as well, because we saw several new additions via the transfer portal along the offensive line. You mentioned Sheridan Wilson, who has emerged as a frontline guy there, who was not a transfer, was already in-house. But when we're talking about some of these others, whether it's Porcher or Scurry or Davion Carter, obviously they're new faces to the program. So that one seems to be fairly accurate. And I also wonder, I guess, can we say that they have checked that box so far this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with this statement at all, because I think you are kind of cobbling it together in some ways. But as we look at the post-spring depth chart, the left side of your line is portal, but your center and everything to the right is homegrown and developed. Well, I say that Ty Buchanan, although he's been here for, it feels like a long enough time to where it feels like you're the one that essentially has developed him and turned him into what you want him to be at right tackle. So, but yeah, Taj Brooks is a legit dude. And, and I think that I don't know how I feel about, in a way, I think this is a good thing. Maurice Rodriguez was a very highly recruited, prospect at the time. Back at semester, and I think there was a lot of, big name programs involved. He didn't really even sniff the starting lineup, or wasn't even really in that conversation at any of the media availabilities or anything like that. And he's the second team guy right now. I don't take that as a bad thing per se. I don't think that means you missed on him. I think that Davion Carter not being a starter yet, I mean, somebody was going to get squeezed, and it may not necessarily be Carter. We still have August left to play out, and then you have to hope that everybody's healthy. But I think they are deeper and more experienced. You just hope they're better. That's really what you're ultimately asking, and it's still a question mark for me until I see it for a couple of 4 weeks. I still want to know if they're better, and that's really the biggest question mark that you have on the team, other than Barron's shoulder.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And I think that sentiment is well said as far as just be better. Whether you need to be older, bigger, badder, whatever, be better. And I mean better in the sense of attitude. Of course, we're talking about an offensive line. Nastiness is always welcome. Okay, getting back to some of that recruited talent and some of these guys since Coach McGuire and his staff have been on the scene, beginning to emerge as guys that have a chance to make an impact. And we saw some of these thrown into the fire last year, which maybe was a little bit earlier than we hoped for as far as freshmen. But a third thought from an anonymous Big 12 coach says this season will test the staff's ability to develop. It's year 3, so all the hype about being better tied in with Texas high schools has to start showing up. As far as the accuracy is concerned, Chris, wondering how you're feeling about that. And also, of course, given the timeline, we've mentioned it. I think we got into this just on yesterday's show. Year 3 is the time where you would like to see, quote unquote, some of his guys, as far as Coach McGuire and his staff, really begin to make an impact. So do we have a chance to do that? And I know you've already mentioned a couple of names.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fair assessment. I think it's a fair question to ask. I think Joey would ask the same thing aloud. and has probably looked at a lot of guys in the team meeting room whenever they've assembled, and it is their time. Again, a bit younger, the quote unquote no name defense. But it is time for, because and you see, John Curry in the 2 deep. You mentioned Dingle and Horn at linebacker, and Dylan Spencer. As far was a highly recruited guy a year or so ago. Part of these original classes, and Duda Banks and Charles Esters, it's now kind of their show. Adedire was a big addition, and it's now kind of his show up front. Quincy Ledet was their guy via the portal, but he's kind of the mainstay up front. But again, you just look at all across. I mean, it's Brennan Jordan and Jordan Sanford's secondary. Jalen Peoples was his guy. Mo Horn is somebody that is ready to kind of take the next step. He's just listed as a sophomore. Braylon Lux was there. So this is really the bulk of the majority of their people. And it's just offensively, it's really a lot of the same. It's just harder when the biggest question mark is offensive line, and that is typically the one position. There's just no way to fast track it. You need 2 to 3 years at least for a high school kid to really come in, and they need to be a redshirt sophomore or a true junior kind of thing for it really to typically stick. And that's really where the bugaboo is at that particular spot. But I mean, you're telling me that you don't like the work that they did in the portal with wideouts, and we'll get to that point in a minute, or what they did from a recruiting standpoint with Coy Aiken and Micah Hudson, and on it goes. So I mean, this is really going to have Joey's fingerprints all over this roster from a recruiting standpoint. James Blanchard as well. And again, there's some inexperience there, and that makes people really nervous at times because there's going to be mistakes that they make. That's just part of it. That's why it sucks when you lose a senior, because they don't make many mistakes, or you hope that they don't. And people like Rabbit have all these intangibles. They can be an extension of the staff on the field, and you don't really have that guy. You just don't. And your quarterback, it feels like he's been here for forever, but he is still very inexperienced when you look at it. Practice reps, and just true game reps, especially when healthy. So there's plenty of questions like that to go around, but there's a lot of this recruiting that they've done that's starting to peek through, and it's being handed the baton here and saying, okay, your turn now.
Well, and I'm really wondering specifically about that word develop, because I think as we sit here and we discuss recruiting wins and getting guys on campus, whether it is from the prep rank or the high school rank or transfer portal guys, it can feel a little bit different as far as considering that versus development whenever they arrive. You get a success, you get a win in February, that's great. But ask the Aggies, nobody wants to be February champions and February champions only. That gets you nowhere. And I know that the development doesn't stop for a transfer portal guy, like they show up and they're a finished product. We've seen, whether it's football or Grant McCaslin's basketball program, that you can wind up with a guy having his best season if it's his last season, if he's coached well and will take to that coaching. So the development continues, obviously, for transfers as well. But I am very curious about the development aspect of some of these younger guys. And I don't really have, to be honest with you, just a great read on that just yet, because I think some of these young guys we've talked about as far as a chance to make an impact this year are only now beginning to kind of give us an example as to how either they can be developed or a coaching staff can develop a player in general. Does that make sense? I don't even know if, 3 years into it, you talk about, okay, well, the guys finally have a chance to make an impact that he recruited, but it may still be another year or two before we say, well, that coaching staff really took that guy a long way, and turned him into a quality player. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And there's a million ways to construct rosters these days in college football, and we see a million different ways. We see a mesh of different ideas put together and all that. But Joey he's not going to stray from the high school, developmental part, and not, they're not going to stray from really taking the bulk of their recruiting and their new players in via the high school ranks. And it's not necessarily all state of Texas guys. Heck, they're offering guys in the North and South Dakota. I think as James Blanchard will tell you, every time I look up North Dakota, South Dakota, North Dakota State, those folks are winning like Division II national championships. There's a reason why those players, and those programs are winning. It's because nobody goes and recruits those areas. And where did Chris Kleiman come from? He seems to know what he's doing at Kansas State. Well, he came from that neck of the woods, and they were winning a ton of championships. And so I just think that it's different philosophies. Whereas some schools like the Ole Miss or the TCUs, they've just said, man, screw it. We're going all portal, man. Like, the majority of it. We're going to go heavy into the portal. That's what we're doing. Yes, we'll take some high school kids, but it's all about culture and having a process to where you don't have to lean on brand new guys immediately from the high school ranks, and you have time to grow them up and get them in the weight room and add weight to them and develop them and as humans too, as much as anything. I mean, some kids just mentally are not ready to walk in the door and ready to go. That they need whoa, slow down. They need to call a timeout and figure out life a little bit first. Because what's fascinating to me is the guys that have been in the program for 3 to 4 years, you start to hear them talk different. Yeah, man, I'm really starting to focus on my sleep, and I'm trying to eat better. And it's because they've just matured. The time is running out. They get to the end, and they start realizing all these things they've all been told, it really matters. Whereas the young guy, he doesn't know. He doesn't care until he does. And that's part of the development too.
I wish I had known that thought or that phrase back in the day when it was, I don't know, 8 or whatever in the summer, and my dad's trying to throw a hoe in my hand, and that's a farm tool, folks, and point me to a row to hoe. Father, I'm just trying to focus on my sleep. Would you give me a damn minute? But that was a new thought for a young Casey Cowan. All right, let's wrap up here with a couple of other thoughts from this mystery coach's view, and we'll stick with the offensive side of the football.
First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, and it's do or die time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, player props, money lines, and a whole lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, let's wrap up here with a couple of other thoughts from this mystery coach's view, and we'll stick with the offensive side of the football. Fourth thought, can I count? Offensively, hard to criticize their scheme or the production because it seems like they're always getting a backup QB ready to play after injury. Now, as to the validity of at least part of this comment, we can tell you in the 806, it doesn't just seem like we're always getting a backup quarterback ready to play after injury. We are always getting a backup QB ready to play after injury. But the criticism part being difficult, obviously for a fan, it's never difficult to criticize offense because we're all offensive coordinators in our spare time. And so we've got that just in our pocket at all times. But I think, Chris, the overall production for the year, okay, I don't know, maybe like a B+, and it's all because of Taj Brooks. It is all because of Taj Brooks that you'd even get a passing grade, I think, in that regard. But I don't know, maybe you cook with a B+. Is it an A because of how good Taj Brooks was? I'll leave that to the folks in the audience. But I think there is a critique that does resonate with me beyond just being a fanatic, and that is coming to know what your offensive identity is early in the season, which I don't feel like they really did, or I feel like it was kind of delayed. And I know there's been talk about that this offseason, even among the coaching staff. You've mentioned that to me as well, that, really trying to get a feel for what they can be or most, adept at being earlier into the year. You look at those Taj Brooks carry numbers through the first couple of weeks last year, and it's like night and day compared to what the season turned out to be. And I know some fans have already shared that kind of critique with us throughout the offseason. And, there's always going to be that layer of dealing with quarterback injury when you look back at last season, and, you could really never kind of get out of the starting blocks with your passing game. But establishing that identity or having a better feel for that identity earlier, probably easier said than done, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think that is a priority for them to try and be there a little bit earlier this year.
Yeah, and I look at the comment that you're talking about here, and then I look at the last one about the receivers, and it's so you kind of intertwine them, because we all kind of were, whether it's coaching staff or players or people that are talking on podcasts, we were all kind of in some ways duped a bit, in that we all kind of thought the receiving group would be much better than it was. And we just did. And yeah, there was some production lost, but I think you felt like you were going to be a little more balanced, and you just weren't, because your receivers just were extremely average. I mean, just to kind of call it like it was. I mean, virtually no yards after catch, a lot of drops, a lot of inconsistency. And some of that is quarterback and timing and the injury that came with that. But I remember, one of the best plays. I mean, Jake Strong had the longest run for a quarterback, or maybe the second longest run. I think Tyler Shuck had a long one against Oregon, if memory serves. But Jake Strong had a long one versus Kansas State, and then you threw a shorter pass to Xavier White at BYU, and that one went for a long one. But then there was a lot of mistakes made in that game too. But there just wasn't a lot of, And that's what we've talked about, really, to try to sum it up. That was what you had, no explosiveness, and you really were limited in that area, and that's what made the scheme or play calling, and that's where everybody kind of had the gnashing of teeth, because it's just frustrating. But yeah, you probably, had you known what you knew by mid-October, and you known that in the Wyoming game, would you call it differently? Probably. And I think Zach and Joey have talked about that, but they didn't know it. And I think that in some ways this year, it's still a bit tricky in trying to know because what they really didn't know, if we want to get down to it, is I think they thought the receivers would be better. And I agreed. And I think you did too. And we all kind of did. And then you thought the offensive line would be a bit different or better. And it just wasn't. It was extremely average. And those were the components that I think, as they tried to keep hammering away at it, and maybe you have to, pivot quicker and say, man, after a week or two, this didn't work, and change it, or let's stop banging our head against the wall. But the last comment, that they lost all of their good receiver talent to the portal, so there's a lot of rebuilding to do there. While that is true, I just don't know if anything needs to be rebuilt there. It needed to be reset, is the better way to phrase it. It wasn't very good. And there's some sentimentality there with guys like Jerron Bradley and Miles Price. I love Xavier White. There was some good pieces there at times. But as a group, it just didn't scare teams much at all. There's no getting behind the defense. There's no breaking of tackles. And the quarterback and different signal callers factoring in, is part of the conversation there as well. But just way too many drops and just inconsistency in general. I don't know any other way to put it. And I think that part needs to be mentioned. Not that you need to be rebuilt. It needed to be, I don't know, scrapped and reset.
Yeah, upgraded.
Yeah, upgrade. Yeah, I mean, and you needed to get faster. You needed to get more explosive. I think we saw glimpses of Coy Aiken. I mean, I'm ready for the big picture of that, a version of that. I'm ready to see what he does now, as he's still got it all in front of him. And then to see some of these bells and whistles, like, Dre McCray, now that he's got some speed around him. And obviously your Douglas and your Hudsons and really Josh Kelly. I just think Josh Kelly walks in here and he's easily the best wide receiver that you have on your team. And that includes highly touted freshmen and all the things, because he's done it at a Power 5 level and he's polished and all the things that come with it. This person didn't exist last year. It just didn't. And so
if he existed in Lubbock, he would have been the best receiver on your team last year.
Yes,
we would have
absolutely.
been saying the exact same thing.
Yes, absolutely. And so the final comment about the receivers kind of goes in some ways hand in hand with the statement about the scheme and the production and all that. It's all kind of really tied in there together. But yeah, they needed to get faster, more explosive, all the stuff, because it's hard to call a perfect play all the time, or it's hard to make a perfect pass all the time. It's hard for Taj to break all the tackles that he did. So you need some folks that make life a bit easier on you and increase your margin for error.
Well, you may think so, but not in Section 101. They're calling perfect plays up there every snap. If somebody just turn around and pay attention to us. Going into last year, I can't really say that I was bought in to the things you were describing as far as better wide receiving core, better offensive line. I did not expect the offensive line to be markedly improved as far as pass protection specifically. I did not expect the quarterback play to be improved, just because I was never very high on Tyler Shuck in general. And I was hoping, now I am also coming from a place where I was raised in a football sense to be 3 yards in a cloud of dust, word to Jerry Blakely all day, every day. So I do have that built-in bias. I'll just say that. But there was one guy, Chris, that I really thought going into the season, okay, maybe this is going to be the guy, if he can be this type of player, that will change my mind and make me feel like maybe you can have an impactful passing game. And it was Jaron Bradley. I really thought if this dude takes the step to the next phase of his sort of football career or football ascension and becomes a go-to target that every defense has to account for, well, then obviously the rest of those pass catchers are going to have better years as well. I didn't see Bradley do that. Bradley did not do that. And while he had some big moments, I think about Lawrence, Kansas, he had some big moments. He did not transition into that week after week after week kind of guy that the defense did have to account for. And I think that's what limited any further growth. I'm not trying to put it all on him, but for a guy like me that was skeptical of that kind of thing, I thought, all right, well, if Bradley maybe can transition into this next phase or take this next step, then I'm going to start to buy in to a degree. And we just didn't see it, unfortunately, consistently enough. And that's why at the end of the day, you did need to upgrade. And to wrap it up, I think we would say that box was checked this offseason as far as trying to restock, rebuild, or upgrade, whatever way you want to describe it. So some good thoughts there. And I want to hear certainly from the audience on these thoughts and your take on this anonymous coaching view. Chris, I think this could be one of the favorite episodes of all time because we had a graphic on the screen for 98% of this show. Now, there is one of us who has the nickname Big Handsome, so that may only apply to me because I'm not the one with that nickname. But, man, look at that young, fresh-faced buck there, right? Oh, God, I wish I was still that man.
You got it. It's a great mugshot right there. Yeah, you got you look good with the
Enjoyed it anyway, Chris. Great to see you once again, and we're back on the other side to do it again, man. Appreciate the time as always.
Sounds good. Keep hope alive, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
And make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts if you're not already, so you never miss an episode. And the best way to help us grow the show is to comment anything below. So please give us your feedback, your reaction to the things said today about our Red Raiders. Thanks for being out there, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.